So I'll hand over to them now. Thank you.
Thanks, Jen. So hi, I'm Megan. I'm the Membership Engagement Coordinator at CEFA, which means I look after all of our range of groups. I make sure they're happy and we stick to all our regulations and provide an excellent source of networking for you guys. So like Jen said, today is just an opportunity to celebrate and really shine a spotlight on some innovative early career research. I think for many of us, the university was such a big background for our start towards archaeology, our start towards the historic environment. And well, just a great chance to really get involved and throw back to those times and look at our own research, but look up towards some really key points. Hopefully today, I wanted to give you a bit of a recap over today's part of the programme. I'll just run over the first half for you. I don't believe I understand that we're missing our first speaker today. So after our introduction, we're having a bit of a switch around, and Flori Farkas is very gratefully she's supporting us with our first talk on how we can use machine learning to identify some hill forts in our southwest of Britain. So a very identifiable and very key topic, I'm sure you know, in terms of AI learning. And then we have Simran Kaur towards managing our vulnerable urban sites, so the role of digital recording and public outreach for an effective site study on Shees Maghal in India. So thank you so much for our speakers today. After that, we'll have a quick Q&A. So for many of our speakers today, it's our first time presenting in such a level of a conference. So do, if possible, keep your excitement, and if you're thinking about some questions, please make sure that you're on mute, but also you can type them in the chat, and our designated Q&A session, which starts at 2:50 on to 3:05, we'll have a chance to pick over those questions and get things sorted for you all. So thank you so much, and over to you, Flori.
Right, let's see if this works. Okay, can you guys see the presentation? All good?
Yeah, all good.
Okay, great. So hello everybody, my name is Flori and I just finished my degree in archaeology and anthropology from the University of Southampton, and my dissertation was about how can we use machine learning to identify hill forts in southwest Britain. So why do we care about this topic as archaeologists? Why is machine learning so great for this use? So deep learning is a subset of machine learning in which multi-layered neural networks learn from vast amounts of data. And this is great for archaeology because it can automate the most time-consuming parts of landscape prospection. And hill forts are a great subject for this because they are so numerous, characteristic in the landscape, and there are multiple detailed databases freely available online that contain them. However, they are also very complex and non-uniform, and erosion also affects them a lot. So these are kind of the cons of using these as the subject. So using machine learning is not new in archaeology. There have been attempts at first at image classification, which is basically just saying, is this image a dog, yes or no? And then object detection, which is a bit more advanced, when we can actually draw a bounding box around the object and say, okay, so here is where the actual object is located within the image. And we can also attach scores as to how confident we are that it is actually a dog or a cat. And then image segmentation is where we can actually identify the exact boundaries of the object as well. And this is what I used for hill forts. As I said, they're non-uniform, but more or less oval in shape. And it was really beneficial to use this technique instead of bounding boxes. So yes, instance segmentation is the exact vision task I used, and this is because it can actually identify each individual hill fort as its own instance with its own confidence score. So this was the deep learning part of my approach, but it's not just that. I also relied on archaeological theory and GIS. So let's look at GIS now. The first step was collecting the data, and this was digital terrain model from LiDAR, which is basically the last return of a LiDAR portraying the surface of the Earth. And this was great because then we can disregard of forests and buildings, etc., that can obstruct the view from hill forts. Then I used my own visualization on this raster. I combined multiple scales to create this final image. So this is a good example of how the meso and micro scales really highlight archaeological objects that we wouldn't be able to see otherwise. And finally, slope to add some dimension to it. So this is called feature engineering, which is just manipulating the raw data to make it easier for machine learning to identify objects. And it's not new. I heavily relied on this study by Guillot et al. But instead of differentiating the different scales, I differentiated the depressions and protrusions in the landscape, and this increased the CNN performance overall. So then we also need the locations of hill forts to be able to digitize them. And I used the Oxford Atlas of Hill Forts, which is also freely available online, and digitized 668 of the hill forts there, which is a very small data set. So in order to have a bigger one, I applied geometric transformations to each image, and this way you can immediately create 8 images instead of 1, and then I had 8,200 images altogether. Of course, this also means that there are images of hill forts that only portrayed one corner of it and not the whole thing, which is problematic because if the model only sees a corner, it's going to learn to identify the hill fort as just the corner and not the actual shape. So I applied a code wherein I could basically separate only the whole hill forts within these images, and therefore created 15,700 images to train on. And training works by putting in the label, which is hand digitized, and the raster image that that is to do with the label, and then which is also called a chip. Once we put in the RGB data, the model basically weights which attributes are the most important within that data, and this way it can learn to identify them. So for example, here, if you can see the cat, it's kind of like squinting. If you see an image of a cat, you can kind of identify that it has triangular ears, where the eyes are, etc. And these are the most important attributes of the cat, so we can identify them from unknown images. So yeah, as I said, this is the training part. And once we have a correctly weighted model, we can use it to infer the unknown images and create new labels. And this was my workflow. Other than data collection, all of these steps were repeated 3 times over from an untrained masked RCNN model. This was to avoid overfitting, which can become an issue if we keep training the same model for too long. And because of this iterative training, I constantly increased the number of classes and also the number of images that I was training on. And this way, the model was more and more accurate and more able to identify a wide variety of hill forts. So these are my results. As you can see, most of them are possible sites, which are also called true positives, wherein I assessed these results and said, oh yeah, that could be a hill fort. Obviously, I'm no expert, so all of these should be also assessed by hill fort experts to see if they're actually correct, and even fieldwork if possible. But as you can see, there are also a lot of false positives, which are what the model deemed as hill forts but weren't. These were usually fields with protrusions around them, which kind of look like hill forts. Sometimes it's really hard to tell them apart, even for a human person, let alone a model. So yeah, and then I also added additional classes with every phase. So enclosures, motte and baileys, that look very similar, and then also urban hill forts, meaning hill forts in urban areas, Roman camps, which are usually rectangular, and promontory forts, which are usually very heavily eroded because they were on the coast or on cliff edges. So then there's also validation, which is basically testing the robustness of the model. So if you can imagine a model as a child learning a new thing, you can test that child if he or she or they learned what you taught them by showing them completely new images that they haven't seen before. So, is this an elephant? Yes or no? That kind of thing. But in this case, it's hill forts. So usually the training set and the validation set, training area and validation area is separate, but because the chip sizes were so small compared to the actual sizes of the tiles, it didn't really affect the overall performance to use areas for training and validation. And it also helped because obviously there weren't a lot of hill forts available. So yeah, these are the results based on validation. So basically how many of the known hill forts were correctly found. And then false negatives are ones that weren't found. And the unrecognizable ones are basically what I deemed as it doesn't really look like a hill fort. We wouldn't be able to identify it. So that's either stuff that's heavily eroded or just completely different from what we imagine hill forts as. So yeah, disregarding those unrecognizable hill forts, the accuracy was 78.1%. Obviously, the most problematic tile was SM, which is in the corner of Wales, which is a very coastal area with not a lot of hill forts. So most of them were very heavily eroded. And if we disregard that one tile already, the accuracy is much better. So what I'm going to do in the future is take promontory forts as a completely separate class and train them separately from hill forts. So yeah, these are just some examples of the promontory forts. They're so different from usual hill forts. So just to make sure that they were actually unknown hill forts, I also compared them with other databases, but they're only available for England, unfortunately, not Wales. So for the Welsh data, I only had the Oxford Atlas to rely on. And this kind of highlights a need for curating a uniform database which machine learning can be applied to perfectly. So this one, for example, was in the NHLE database, but not in the Oxford database. And this one was neither in NHLE nor Oxford, but it was on the AIM mapping as earthworks. And then this one wasn't on any of them, but it does kind of look like a hill fort. So this is where we would be, we would want to go to the field and actually check these sites out. And this one as well. And this one as well. Right, it also highlighted the need to kind of update our terminology. Hill forts, it's kind of an outdated term. We now know that it's not necessarily just defensive enclosures. It can be, So I proposed the word hilltop enclosure instead of hill fort, so it's more concentrated on the form and not the function. And you would think that erosion would be a hindering factor, but not necessarily. For example, here, you would think that it only recognizes the more prominent half of this hill fort, but it actually recognized the whole thing. So that was a nice surprise. And it shows that machine learning is more capable than we would think at first. So in conclusion, what is the research significance of this? Using GIS, machine learning, and archaeological knowledge together provides a focus in both research and fieldwork, and it speeds up desk-based assessment. We can create a uniform, reliable, and verifiable database instead of many subjective interpretations and gaps in databases. And we can also identify hill forts that weren't previously known and facilitate their care and management. And then for the future, I am currently working with RKI, who are also using AI for archaeology with Dr. Iris Kramer. I am also going to publish my dissertation, well, an abridged version with the Prehistoric Society. So hopefully you'll be able to see it in more detail. And I'm also doing a part-time master's, well, starting to this week. And hopefully I can continue my research through that master's. So I really want to extend it to a national scale. And I also, as I said, really want to separate promontory hill forts so they would be their own little project, basically. And also apply it to new objects that I haven't really dealt with before, for example, mounds, because they're really prominent with my visualization. And hopefully, yeah, I will be able to do that soon, possibly for my master's thesis. Yeah, and this is also another idea. So this is not necessarily reliant on machine learning, just my visualization. But on a relatively flat landscape, if we increase it even more, you can immediately see so much of the history of the landscape. And if we apply machine learning to that, we could even separate these layers and kind of get a whole chronology of space, which is just so exciting to me. So yeah, hopefully they'll be coming soon as well. And that was it. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Florrie. Wow, it's just amazing, and to see so much about how it can be applied in future. I mean, hopefully you'll like to come back and tell us in a couple of years about more research that you've been up to. I also didn't really know that overfitting the model with different training would be a danger. So that's quite, well, a bit of a refreshing take on it all, I suppose. Yeah, it's just a fascinating application of machine learning and all. Yeah, so just a quick sorry, thank you so much. Feel free to feel free to do a react if you fancy, or just type any questions you may have for Florrie in the chat box, and we'll go over in our designated Q&A spot. So our next speaker is Simran, and I think we all know in any shape of involvement we have in archaeology, those impending dangers of development towards our preservation of our historic sites. And Simran's topic features just that over in India on a fantastic, well, beautiful site. So yes, if you do have any questions for Florrie, please do add them in the chat, and feel free to answer them as you go. But yeah, over to you, Simran.
Hello, everyone. I'm Simran Kaur, and I'll be talking about this very lovely site today called the Sheesh Mahal back in Haryana, India. So my background is in archaeology. I did my master's at UCL in 2021, 2022, and I specialize mainly in managing archaeological sites, public archaeology, with a special focus on urban archaeological heritage sites in India, because of the sheer reason of how the whole conflict between development and preserving sites and conserving them, it is sort of in a mishmash back home. And that's exactly the issue that I'll be talking here. And I'll also be looking at a few digital recording techniques as well as public outreach engagement efforts that can be utilized in order to perhaps improve the management of the site that I'm talking about, as well as just make the conservation last in a more sustainable manner as well. So, yeah. So before I begin, I'll just talk a little about the organization that I'm affiliated with. And this is also the organization that I sort of documented the site with. So Speaking Archaeologically is an archaeological education group based both in the UK and India. And we mostly focus on public archaeology and digital archaeology, just trying to make archaeological research more accessible to not just researchers or aspiring students, but even the common public. So we more than often publish our research through YouTube videos, even generate data collected on EpiCollect through sitemaps and so on and so forth. So the main aims of my research is to basically take comprehensive site study and condition assessment of the Sheesh Mahal in Farrukhnagar. Again, as we will see during the course of the presentation, even on the official Archaeological Survey of India site, there are barely a few photos and just a paragraph about the site and its history that's written there. So not an effective site study has been taken place for this site. Secondly, I'm also looking at how digital recording techniques, so for example, GIS, 3D modeling, and EpiCollect as a tool for generating site reports really is helpful when you are trying to assess risk, you're trying to monitor the site over a long period of time as well. And how sort of linking to the third aim of my research can also be helpful when we are looking at a larger scale public engagement and outreach of the site. So how are you really making the site relevant to the local community, and how are you involving the local community hand in hand with the management of the site as well? So just a little bit about the site and its geographical context, really. So the site is located in the state of Haryana, as you can see here, and in the city of Gurgaon. Now, Gurgaon is your upcoming urban uh, sort of economic city with lots of concrete houses that are now spread all across the city, and it's mostly a hub for MNCs and other international offices, really, that have started coming in. But as a result of the ongoing urban development and urban density as well, a lot of these heritage structures that have been mapped around the city, they have either been encroached upon or they have been demolished to give way to high rises in the city now. So as we look at the Sheesh Mahal as well, Sheesh Mahal as well is surrounded by a lot of modern constructions around, a lot of urban population and density around as well. So it's just barely hanging on at the moment. So yes, a little bit of historical background to the site. So unfortunately, not much really survives in terms of primary resources to get an insight into the historical background for this region and for this site. We mostly just have colonial records in terms of the gazetteers and surveys that were undertaken in the 19th and early 20th century to give a little bit of insight into what the site was about. But the Sheesh Mahal, which basically translates into a mirror palace, and that's a common phenomena that you see mostly in Mughal architecture at this point. This was built in 1733, so that's pretty late Mughal again, uh, early 18th century, and becomes a significant piece of information because this was the residence of a governor, a provincial governor. So just gives a little more insight into what the socio-political situation was like in the early 18th century in terms of provisional rule as well, and the structures there as well. So this was a fortified city. And we also have other subsequent structures in the vicinity as well. So there's the Jama Masjid, there's also Sethani Ki Chhatri, and a few more step wells and another structure. Again, with these structures, two of these have been converted into government offices. So you have no access whatsoever inside these buildings, and the facade has been changed considerably. The mosque still is functional and is under the control of a religious body there. The Sheesh Mahal that you see at the moment, that's under the control of the State Archaeological Department. So it is listed as a protected monument under the Archaeological Survey of India, but it's mostly the State Archaeological Department that is concerned with the upkeep of the structure that we see here. Now, moving on to the condition assessment of the site. So I visited the site back in February this year when I made a visit to India. And I undertook large-scale photographic documentation of the site. Thankfully, I also had previous plans to rely on to make another sort of a revamped version of the existing site plan as well. So the American Institute of Indian Studies, they are the only organization alongside INTACT that did take a brief study of the site some 10 years back. And there has been considerable change ever since. So these red boxes that you see around here, these are the structures that are almost non-existent now. So you can see large scale deterioration, large scale loss of material. So you have pillars just falling down, bricks coming off. There's also some attempt at the conservation of the site as well. So back in 2007, 2008, the Archaeological Survey of India, they did undertake brief conservation here at the site, but that also resulted in just whitewashing and plastering on the walls and not really keeping in mind the exact traditional techniques of make as well. So that also resulted in a lot of vegetation growth over the years as well. So this area that you see here, as well as this area, it's also highly inaccessible as a visitor because you have a lot of vegetation growth happening and also the risk of material falling from the roof. So the ceilings also have big gaps in them. So all in all, it is in a precarious situation. And the photos in the next slide, they sort of show you what the situation is like at the site. So as you can see here, this is on the eastern wall of near the gateway, the main gateway to the site as well. And as you can see, a lot of discoloration has happened. There's a massive loss of material. There's heavy vegetation growth here at the ceiling as well. And it's just fairly very difficult to navigate the path here. Similarly, this is the wall on the south side of the site. And again, as you can see, you can barely access it. Here is a hint at the conservation that was undertaken back in 2000, 2008. And again, you can see this has just been a mere plastering over the walls, really. And this is the back enclosure to the main structure of the palace. And again, most of the structure is non-existent at the site. You also have frequent vandalism happening as well, with graffiti displayed all across the structure. And generally, there's only one sidecar at the site. The site is mostly locked to the public. So even if you're visiting the site as a visitor, you don't know whether you can go inside or not. Because it's usually locked, and you let the person know, and then he opens it up for you and lets you in. But you do see locals coming in, mostly either for drinking or just taking aesthetic photos or basically vandalizing as well. Previously, the site was also used as a school, and then it was also used as a police station. Now it is a protected site, but the local community around, they aren't really aware about its significance, so they don't really know much about what's happening here. Although we do see some slight engagement as well, which we'll come back to later. So, giving you a little bit context about management of archaeological sites in the Indian context, so it has been listed as a touristic destination in the formal government regional plan as well. However, again, because there has been not accurate regular mapping and identification happening regularly over these years, nothing really has been done in terms of that plan. The fundamental issue really, again, arises from the fact that we are still relying on colonial listings and colonial surveys that were undertaken in the early 20th century. Even at the moment, we're still relying on John Marshall's conservation plan, which was drafted out in the 1920s. So as a result of that, you are sort of missing a lot of structures that were deemed less important in the early 20th century. They are still deemed as less important. And as a result of that, even if they're archaeologically or historically significant, they're not being taken care of that properly. And another major thing that you see here is, again, with the apathy of the public towards the site, is there is a disjuncture between the conservation of the built structure and involving the local community as well in its welfare. So basically, the conservation efforts are only just targeted towards conserving the built structure of the site, and that has led to basically removing encroachers from the site without really understanding their social context, not really interacting with the local community, and as I said, with the lock gates and stuff, not giving them easy access to the site as well, which has created a further sort of a discontent with the site existing here, especially if you sort of look at the larger developmental issues and economic needs and welfare needs as well that are there at the moment. And as you can already guess, there is no visitor services at the site. So you just have one information board telling you briefly about the site, and that's all. There's no signage. There are no sort of boards telling you about which structure is what really. So how does uh, digital archaeology really come into place here? So as I was undertaking the mapping of the site, I obviously did do a lot of digital photography, and I map the site through that. But another really important tool that has come in hand to me while I've been documenting this site, and as well as other sites in India, has been Epicollect 5. So that has been a very critical tool where you can compile your site reports in a comprehensive manner. Again, it's easy to use, it's open access, everyone can use it. So it's also a great tool in terms of citizen science as well, getting more citizen archaeologists involved as well in terms of mapping these vulnerable structures. And another good thing about Epicollect is, so with some other sites, more large scale sites, I've tried mapping the data collected on Epicollect onto a map on QGIS as well. So that also gives possibilities in terms of generating story maps, in terms of just plotting all the data together on GIS as well, just to sort of see and locate all of these sites and just understand them a bit more. Another sort of an intervention here may also come in the form of 3D modeling as well. So again, generating 3D models of the facades of different rooms, it also in a way helped in assessing the certain damages that would not be clearly visible to you while you're there in person. And then again, sort of integrating these models in those story maps just for a wider outreach. So what's the way forward, really? So looking at outreach and visitor engagement. Again, as I said, attempts have been made to document and conserve the structure, but a major drawback is public engagement. So we could start with perhaps making heritage community groups at the ground level. So there's this one gentleman, he's a retired teacher, and he is that one person who does undertake regular heritage walks around this structure, but he's the only person who does that. And the reason why he came into limelight is because another educational group really found him doing that, and then they sort of created awareness around that. But if we have a formal sort of a heritage community group or self at the ground level, that really helps give voice to people who are actually interested in preserving the structure and letting their stories also shine through this way. Again, as I said, also using the idea of story map and using Epicollect to our advantage in terms of collecting and also disseminating data as well. And at a larger level, when this is done, perhaps also creating heritage festivals or events, which not just talks about this site, but also links it to the other structures that we have in the vicinity. So just concluding, again, the bottom line is to also understand what really conceptualizes a heritage space. Uh, in terms of looking at the past, you also need to understand the needs of the present, and that's one major thing that has been lacking for this site. So I think once we do that, and once we also obviously employ our methodology, perhaps there might be a chance that the site might be conserved and managed sustainably over the years. But thank you so much. And if you have any questions, please do pop them in the chat. There's also my email ID, so you can mail me as well. But thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Simran. That was really, really interesting, deep look into the site, and also quite a great potential for placemaking. I would have thought within what you say is that you're approaching quite local development there. Yeah, definitely interested in hearing further there on like what those kind of approaches are in India. I mean, I'm quite England based, so I really don't really see it internationally. But definitely interesting to see a little bit more on there. So just a quick heads up to anyone who's joined. I can definitely see there's a lot of joining in on the chat there, that we have had a bit of a quick switch around with the sessions today, and you might have noticed with our timings we are chopped around there, so my thanks goes to all the speakers just to being so resilient with our little spontaneous changes. However, it does give you more of a chance for the Q's and A's, and even more of a chance for a cup of tea at the break time, so there's definitely some positives there. So if you want to add any questions you may have in the chat, or I think I can see any hands pop up. Ellen or Jen, you might have to help me there. But if you do have any questions for Flori or Simran, do shout. I do have one for you, Flori, if you don't mind. So I know you mentioned about how you want to apply the machine learning a bit further. Did you have any ideas for how you wanted to apply it internationally? I know you said about the small data set we have, like your area of scanning, and you had to multiply it, which was really clever. I never thought you could think about that. But I suppose some other larger countries might have a larger data set which might benefit from you looking at.
Yeah, absolutely. It's something that I need to look into. I'm most familiar with British LiDAR data, which is at the moment basically almost national. There's a couple of gaps in Scotland, but yeah, it's a really good detailed data set with high resolution. I've heard that it's similar in Switzerland, but again, I think I would need to research into their archaeology first before I would try and extend, especially with hill forts. I don't even know if they have hill forts, for example. But yeah, this technique can be applied by anybody to any object as long as there is good LiDAR available. Or even with historic maps or any other kind of map where there's a repeated object that's kind of similar. You can easily identify it with machine learning. And as I said in my presentation, the method itself is really easy. You can find the model online. Again, everything is free on the internet. So yeah, I hope I inspire more and more people to try to apply machine learning to their research, even if it's not landscape related.
100%. I mean, I think I've just about broken into ChatGPT, so maybe this machine learning model is a bit far from me, but I definitely encourage anyone to have a go. I think archaeology and the historic environment has got so much to learn from all these frequently updating sectors that the applications can just go tenfold, can't they? Oh, I've got a question in here for you, Simran. I think it's for Simran, and do shout if it's not. For as well as creating local heritage groups, is there interest in creating visitor services that would feed into local employment and hopefully add income into the local economy?
Thank you so much for that question, because again, that would lead me to talk about another point that I couldn't really discuss in the presentation. So there have been a lot of suggestions over the years. So there have been a few professionals working around the heritage in Gurgaon in general, and they have been focusing on the local industries as well that these regions have. So Faruk Nagar, for example, it has its own local craft of mura making, which is basically straw stools really, or straw furniture that you make, and that's quite famous in India as well, and that's one of the places that does it best. But again, there have been talks, but there hasn't been much from the government side in terms of providing more upliftment to the craft there. So, if we sort of link the intangible traditions, the tangible traditions, and the heritage sites in the area, it can give a lot of scope for employment and development as well. Even with my suggestion about creating local heritage groups, the site at this point, it is not even on the radar for tourism at the moment. It is in a very fragile condition at the moment. So if we sort of get it to that pace, and then perhaps if there are more funds or resources available to create additional visitor services, then it has an immense potential to churn out employment, let's say, in terms of tourist guides, heritage guides at the site, in terms of people just regularly patrolling the site. But then again, it all sort of boils down to funds and resources as well. And here, I think obviously it's the government that's controlling it majorly, but we also have other groups like the Aga Khan Trust, because they have been doing phenomenal work in Delhi in terms of the Nizamuddin area. So they have done their urban regeneration project there. If we have groups like these willing to fund structures here as well, then that may create potential future employment opportunities here as well. But then again, it all sort of boils down to funds and resources as well, and acquiring them for the site.
Big way up there, isn't it? I suppose also kind of weighing in on that entry point, Semran. I know you noticed a lot about the graffiti on the site, and you did the 3D modeling scan. How much was picked up on there? Did you notice any trends in terms of dating it, or what the kind of topics were, what people were writing on the walls?
So it was pretty clear as well. Even the graffiti, if you even look at it visually there, it has been pretty clear, and it's more than often just names, or yeah, just basically names marking their presence there. And again, it's quite interesting because that's a common phenomena that you observe across other sites as well in terms of graffiti. But yeah, with 3D modeling, the one good thing is, with this site and even with other sites that we've been trying to 3D model, you can easily pick up the other pigment colors as well. So sometimes on the photo, it might just be slightly visible to you, but sometimes in a 3D scan, it's just more visible. So if it's a differently colored pigment, then it's easy to pick up on that as well there.
Oh wow, that's a really good point. When you mentioned about you said it was Epi Collect 5, did you?
Yeah.
What you used. How did you come across choosing that particular app? Was there any others that you kind of recommend that were on the toolkit as well? Or?
Yes. So actually, again, going back to speaking archaeologically, the site that I'm working with, so we started with this app because I think this was developed at the University of Oxford many years ago. And the research director at the organization, she came across this, and we decided to experiment with it. Firstly, in terms of just when we were doing museum covers, just collecting objects and placing them in a digital database of sorts on that. And then we moved on to sites as well. And while we were doing a lot of GIS earlier this year, we also came across that maybe there is a potential to actually sort of take that data from Epicollect and map it on GIS as well. So we've just been learning and experimenting with Epicollect, but till now, I think it has been approximately 2 years since we've started using Epicollect really, and it has shown a tremendous potential there as well. So we also have a very invested citizen archaeology wing at the organization. So we ask people in general as well who have no experience if they want to download the app and then just collect any site that they visit, just collect information about it and just put it on the app so that it's there in records. So it's also giving people a task as like chance as well to take sort of charge of mapping heritage. So it's been fairly easy to use as well.
Yeah, it's a great opportunity, I suppose, internationally too, to like just take an app. And because a lot of heritage trusts in the UK, well, not to generalise, but they're generally an older age group, and they may not be so technically inclined. So just having something easily be used with an app is just tremendous in terms of collecting that data. Even if JRS is another step for people. I have another question in there for you. Sorry, it seems to be very weighted, so maybe we can have another chance. one for you, Florrie. But Simran, just again, is it all modern graffiti, or does it also tell the stories of any visits in history over time?
Okay, and this is all modern graffiti.
All modern. Okay.
Yeah, this is all modern graffiti. Again, the sad thing about the structure is um, I think it's soon after 1857, the revolt of 1857, because that's the time when the rulers of this region, they were sort of executed and the town went into a decline. And there has been a lot of changes to the structure as well. So even if there would have been traces of the historic graffiti, it's not there anymore. So all the graffiti that we are seeing at the moment, that's all modern. And I think we have another question about opportunities
Yeah.
for public engagement. So actually there are, and that is something that I'm working on. So my future research, the larger research that I'm working on is looking at heritage sites in Farod Nagar with the aim of archaeological heritage management and public engagement as well, because I do believe there is a potential. We just need to formulate a more practical plan of action for that. So I'm hoping to maybe in the future add some more bits to it, really as my research develops.
Yeah, it'd be excellent. I'm looking forward as well to hearing any progress on it too, because like you say, things can turn around really quickly, and I think, you know, even if you see it as graffiti, someone's still seeing the value of being in the place. So
Yeah.
I think there's the answer. There's definitely the power before it. We've just got to go. Just a thank you there for Charlie. Just to head back to you, Florrie. As we know, climate change is such a big topic right now, and everyone's trying to add in and make sure what they're doing is impacting and best placed towards improving the situation that we're in. I know, obviously, you had a bit of a trouble with the machine learning towards those sites which are facing that erasure by being on the coast and such. Do you not think that, well, not thinking terms, but do you reckon there might be any potential in influencing that towards maybe having a positive sense of where the decay is over time? Or how do you reckon machine learning could feed in there?
Yeah, absolutely. I think if there were multiple LiDAR, what's the word? If we had data over time, then absolutely we can track that, and obviously not just with LiDAR but with satellite imagery too. If we can identify those hill forts and then track them over time, we can absolutely see that change. Yeah.
Oh, that's good. So maybe it's a case also in that citizen science, or is that more of a level you don't see it putting together very well? Or...
Oh no, a lot of people who use machine learning use citizen science, especially for digitizing the objects. It took me about a month to digitize those 600 and odd hill forts. So I think if there's more people, and you don't need to be an expert at it because we already have the locations from the Oxford Atlas. So if there's more people who can look at this data, then absolutely, yeah, it's great to apply it. And yeah, same like commercially as well, if there's people who want to partner up and apply their expert knowledge onto machine learning, then that's also doable.
Real. Well, I think there's some fantastic lines towards general archaeological engagement, but also where we can really go with both your talks in Ranaflow, where we can go in the future, and hopefully maybe in a couple of years we'll hear back from you again with a little update as to where our projects are going. So I think that's it so far on the questions. Are both of you sticking around for the rest of the session? Maybe if we get any couple more, you could stick them in the chat or something. Maybe, hopefully. If not, I'm sure we could pass on any questions we have main CFO to get any answered. But thank you so much for coming along today and sharing your research about it. I think if everyone would clap if you're on the screen, or you can do a react, let us know. And yeah, thank you so much. I think that leads us on to a little bit of a prolonged tea break. So we'll have until 10 minutes past, I believe. So feel free to grab yourself a cup of tea and we'll see you in a bit. Thank you.
Hi, everybody.
I hope that was enough time for you to grab a cup of tea, have a quick break. I'll just give it a minute to check everyone's back. Just to introduce myself quickly, because I didn't earlier. My name is Ella McNamara. I'm the Membership Services Coordinator at CIFA. So I work in membership validation and I support the Registered Organisation scheme too. I'll be chairing the second half of the session. Meg's going to be sitting back for a little bit. So I think we'll get started and hope everyone's here just with their cameras off for now. Our first speaker of this session is Martina. Martina Tenzer, and she's going to be giving a talk on social landscape characterization. I'll hand over to you now if you're ready, Martina.
Yes, thank you. I just share my screen. Okay, can you see my screen?
Yes, yeah, that's great.
Brilliant, fantastic. So I'm a PhD researcher at the University of York, so specializing in social values in wider landscapes. So previously I did an archaeology degree at the University of Heidelberg in Germany. Then I worked for quite a lot of years in commercial archaeology in Britain, and also did my part-time MSc in applied landscape archaeology in Oxford. And yeah, now I'm at the University of York. And I think my research fits quite nicely with Florence's approach to images. So while Florence used AI to analyze images, I'm using AI to analyze textual data. So what you can see here is an impression of one of my study areas, the Peak District National Park, which is outlined here on the map in red. And my second study area is the city of Sheffield. And my research is all about collecting stories about favorite places. So favorite places, buildings, objects, neighborhoods. And I want to find out why people connect to these places. What are the reasons behind strong roots, place attachment? And they are all sort of based on childhood memories, life histories, local histories, of buildings, myths, legends, and so on. And Chris Johnston quite recently framed the research gap I try to fill in her publication on social values, when she sort of told us how the criterion of social value is framed, when she said, and I quote, "The necessity for the social value to be a shared value arises solely from the way this criterion is framed in Australian heritage practice, and it's similar in the UK practice. It does not accommodate the situation where many individuals hold independently the same value, and that's exactly what I want to show with my research. So instead of this top-down approach, which we have more or less, which we had over the past decades, very objective and fact-based, and most of the time identifying communities with values in advance, and negotiating in a discourse community values. What I want to provide to this is an approach from bottom up, where I try to identify individual values, individual knowledge, and very people-centered, very subjective, and try to analyze and visualize this, which can then be meaningfully integrated into planning system structures. This is just to give you a bit of an impression what people in the city of Sheffield think is valued by the local population. So we have Victorian street facades, we have these murals, graffiti of graffiti artists in Sheffield, objects like sewer gas distractor lamps, or the river valleys coming into the city. And on the other hand, in my other study area, the Peak District National Park, an impression of valued landscapes and objects. They're very different from the urban environment. We have these wide landscapes, pastoral landscapes with dry stone walls. We have a connection to legends and myths like, for example, Little John's grave in Haversedge, connected to Robin Hood. We have stone circles and wide views, aesthetic values. So my approach, when I started with my PhD, I had to slightly reorientate and redefine my approach. So at the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic, I decided to use Zoom interviews, social media data, and online surveys, so web-based questionnaires, to just ask people what are the favorite places they value and what are the reasons behind it. I used AI technologies mostly because I got different data sizes than dataset sizes than I expected. So, for example, Twitter provided me with thousands of Twitter tweets, and my survey actually provided me with over 500 responses. So I decided to use AI technologies. In this regard, I applied natural language processing, topic modeling, named entity recognition. And so the next step would then again be machine learning or deep learning to train models. And as an output, I decided to create maps for planning and management for local authorities, but I also wanted to provide some form of guidelines for public outreach, for community groups to do their own research, and for public engagement. So this is one of my approaches, topic modeling for my survey data. What you can see on the left is the workflow of my approach. First, I collected in a questionnaire stories and wanted to know what are the places people like. And then in a grounded theory approach, I used topic modeling. So this means I ran this analysis, the algorithm, over the qualitative data, and using a statistical analysis, topic modeling was then able to give me different themes, different topics emerging from the data or latent in the data. And what you can see in the center top, this is what the algorithm returns. So it gave me different models with different numbers of topics. And I decided in this case to go for 57 topics, because after that the curve flattened out, and I got these 37 topics. And in the center bottom, you can see, based on the keywords within the data, within the stories, the algorithm then labeled the data automatically. So I could get an idea what the themes are, what the reasons are people connect to these places. And on the right side, as Florence also mentioned, when you use AI technologies, you have to always make sure that you sort of manually assess the data and how the algorithm performed, to make sure there are no false positives, false negatives, there's nothing wrong. And I then sort of try to fit my data in with the conservation principles of historic England to show how it fits, and it actually showed that it fits quite well. So people do like the historic environment, but there are also additional things like people very much valued green spaces. So I added that then. But artificial intelligence tools do not always work off the shelf. So for example, named entity recognition, which automatically identifies location in your qualitative data and extracts that, doesn't work in the UK context in smaller areas, for example. So these algorithms are most of the time trained on very US-based data. So when I applied the off-the-shelf named entity recognition algorithm to my data, it found, for example, Sheffield, because there is a city of Sheffield in the US. It also found a really small village in the Peak District National Park, which is called Hope, because there is a city of Hope in the US. So that didn't work. In that case, what I did was to filter freely available data sets like the Ordnance Survey data sets, Historic England data sets, to create my own sort of coverage of locations in the Peak District National Park, and then provide that to a string matching algorithm to automatically extract then the places in the Peak District National Park and put them on a GIS map. So what I got from various sorts of approaches was different sets of maps, which can be sorted in terms of complexity or towards engagement. And what you can see here is I started at the top from a very complex map, which is historic landscape characterization, and then sort of applied different algorithms and tools to get various maps and filter data to various maps. So again, here, historic landscape characterization maps as my starting point. They are very abstract, detached, complex and frozen. On the other hand, they are very objective and giving a lot of information about the historic environment. But what I wanted to do is sort of simplify this and show what people value in the landscape. So including this people-centered approach, people's perceptions, needs and visions into maps. And these are just collections of maps I did and produced, created during my PhD. And what you can see is on the left, category based maps based on individually held values, categorized then across my two study areas. I also created issue maps for which I use sentiment analysis. So sentiment analysis can show where negative sentiment is embedded in these stories, and then produce issue maps like the one in the center, or we can do hotspot maps where people have a lot of values and lesser values. The blank areas, of course, don't mean that there are no values. It just means that we don't have data in these areas. What we can also do is extract from social media emojis, and I extracted emojis from Twitter data just to show what people think about areas and think about the places in the Peak District National Park. And in the center, you can see deep maps, story maps, where you can sort of click on the various points and see what people told me, their stories and images they sent me in the survey. And as I mentioned in my introduction, I also wanted to engage people in the stories of people living in the area and valuing these places. So on the right-hand side, you can see I created guided walks based on the stories provided by survey participants. When we use artificial intelligence, we have to be aware that the use has ethical implications, and we have limits and biases in all sort of stages of our research. So at the input stage, we have, of course, make sure that people are aware how their data is used, especially when we want to use the data to train models, which is always a problem. Do we have the consent? Because training a model on data will have implications for the output. And then during the analysis phase, we have to make sure that everything stays explainable. So when we analyze our data, we have to make sure, we have to make clear that there is training data bias, then content and statistics parameters we use have to be made clear. And in the output, we have to ensure that no people are wronged or left out, and we have to make be clear that all the output we produce have consequences for decision making if it's used in this way. If you want to read more about my social media analysis, which I didn't talk too much about because of there's not enough time in 15 minutes, you can read about my social media analysis, about the outcome of the topic modeling applied to my survey, and all other studies I've done in some papers which have already been published or are being published as part of my PhD. And I want to thank you for your attention and for your questions later. Thanks.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Martina. Some really interesting research and a fantastic presentation as well. So just as a reminder, we'll be doing questions at the end of the session now, but please do feel free to use the chat. I can see a couple going in now. Might be a good idea if you have questions you don't want to forget in the next couple of presentations, just pop them in. So thank you again. Our next speaker is Sarah Mitchell, and she'll be giving a talk on the social context behind glass manufacturing in Bronze Age Egypt. So over to you, Sarah.
Okay, I'm just gonna get my presentation up. Okay, can you see it all right?
Yeah, that looks great.
Okay, brilliant. So yeah, my name's Sarah. I've recently completed my master's in archaeology at Newcastle University. And yeah, my dissertation was on glass manufacturing technology in late Bronze Age Egypt. So glass is an interesting material because in late Bronze Age Egypt, it was considered massively valuable because of its exoticism and rarity, but the ingredients it was made out of were basically worthless. Glass was valued almost as highly as precious stones and was used to imitate stones like lapis lazuli. While there's been a lot of research into glass working and the technology behind that, there's been almost no work done on the process of glassmaking and how it became so valuable. So glassmaking in Egypt was introduced by captured craftsmen from northern Mesopotamia, which links it to the earliest Mesopotamian glassmaking techniques. And this also raises questions about how much the value of glass was understood by its craftsmen and why people innovate new materials. So the presence of Egyptian glass ingots found at sites such as the Uluburun shipwreck also present questions about how the glass was separated from the crucibles it was fired in. In my dissertation, we wanted to figure out if the glass was like ground away from the crucibles or whether they were separated due to a particular production technique. As well as this, we wanted to figure out the relationship that the craftspeople had with glass itself and whether this influenced other crafts such as metallurgy. So a common predecessor to the glass manufacturing industry was the production of faience. So faience is a fired silica body which contains small amounts of alkali, and the material would vary in hardness depending on the degree of sintering. Faience had a similar composition to glass, consisting of crushed quartz or sand, also lime and plant ash. Metallurgical practices were also a common predecessor to the glass industry. The use of metals such as copper in Egyptian metalworking follows the trends of the Egyptian love of bright colours and the materials that appear to imitate precious jewels and stones. So excavations at Amarna by Flinders Petrie revealed 2 kilns that were thought to have been used in glass manufacturing. Findings by Nicholson at Amarna also included multiple cylindrical vessels, which were thought to be crucibles for manufacturing glass ingots. Experiments at Amarna to recreate the glass manufacturing process were conducted by Nicholson and Jackson. They utilised seaweed, lime and silica in the process. Their results determined that the kilns at Amarna could have functioned as glass furnaces, but there wasn't any attempt to tackle the question of how the ingots were removed from the crucibles. So Petrie suggested that glass was imported to Egypt from Syria and Mesopotamia and became a product of royal interest as glass production in Egypt became more commonplace and developed alongside the faience industry. Although Amarna was one of the primary glass production centres in late Bronze Age Egypt, glass was traded and manufactured throughout the Mediterranean and the Near East. The royal demand for glass, as well as the connections to decorum and royal ideologies, suggest that glass was a material that separated the elites from the lower classes, and it also acted as a symbol of status and authority for the monarch and those of a higher social status. During the period of New Kingdom Egypt, systems of value were in the process of being developed alongside the globalization of communities and economies in the ancient world. That meant that for many societies, money, art and value were quite intertwined with each other. So the manufacturing workshops across late Bronze Age Egypt pose several questions in relation to the value of glass. There's evidence in Amarna that there was a range of state-controlled and private workshops, suggesting that glass was not completely inaccessible to the lower classes. There are a lot of components and variables to consider in relation to glass manufacturing. For example, the production of ceramic crucibles that glass was fired in, as well as the construction of the furnaces. They would have required quite a degree of skill to be constructed properly. So for the dissertation, experiments were conducted at the Wolfson Laboratory at Newcastle University to understand the design of the crucibles that might have been used. So we constructed a batch of crucibles using grogged stoneware clay, which is similar to the material of crucibles used in late Bronze Age Egypt. And then we used these for the experiments throughout the study. So we conducted a trial run of an experiment using some replica cobalt blue glass in order to see if the glass may be removed from the crucibles within the glass working range. So just after it melted and then was reformed into a solid material. We also conducted quite a bit of field work for this project. So I spent a couple of weeks in Spain helping construct a medieval glass workshop, and I used the furnace from that site for some experiments as well. So in Spain, we used kiln batt as a trial separator for the glass. So for the glass itself, we used glasma, which has a melting temperature of around 1,200 degrees Celsius, and that can be worked from around 1,100 degrees. Kiln batt generally consists of alumina, and it's sourced from kaolin clay. So we mix that into just a paste with water and put them in the crucibles and then put the glasma in. And then this picture here is of them in the furnace. So yeah, 2 crucibles were fired over the course of that project. Following the Spain project, we also conducted some experiments at Wallington in Northumberland. So for these experiments, we used pure powdered lime as a separator, which we again mixed with water to make a paste. And then we also used crushed oyster shells as well, because that's probably what they would have used in Amarna because they were so close to the Nile. They would have been quite accessible. So we used some more replica cobalt blue glass for the Wallington experiments, and the crucibles were fired to around 950 degrees Celsius. To understand how cross-craft interaction might have came into play, I also examined several copper smelting crucibles at the Petrie Museum of Egyptology at UCL. This mainly helped to understand the development of glass manufacturing from metallurgy and how the crucibles differed from each other and glass crucibles. So we had a mixture of results from these experiments. The laboratory experiments proved that while the glass was more malleable when it was removed from the furnace, it wasn't possible to remove it from the crucibles without some kind of separator. The Spanish project and the experiments at Wallington had far more success. The kiln vat used in Spain allowed the glass metal to separate really easily from the crucibles, and it was those results that prompted the use of lime powder and oyster shells at Wallington. The glass fired at Wallington separated from the crucibles really easily. This picture is some of the glass that we tried, and a few of them did form the ingot shape that we were looking for. The glass in the picture here did unfortunately get damaged when we were removing it from the crucible, but it was in the ingot shape as we were removing it. So the use of lime as a separator has proven successful for cobalt blue glass, but differences in coloured glasses might impact this. So Tofsim's analysis of late Bronze Age glass has found significant chemical differences in various colours, and particularly lead antimonate yellow glass has a very different chemical signature to other glass colours. This could mean that they interact with the lime parting layer differently. Different furnaces may also achieve varying results. We used a range of furnace designs throughout this project, which all achieve different results. And it might be the case that the craftspeople in Egypt also use different designs, which could have been developed through cross-craft interaction. So in terms of future work, I'm hoping to start my PhD on this topic in the future, and I want to look into the chemical composition of different glass colours, particularly yellow glass, using equipment such as a micro CT scanner. I had a chance to use the CT scanner at Newcastle University, and it had potential to show the size and distribution of opacifiers in the glass, which make the glass coloured, basically. I'd also like to look into the different furnace designs and layouts of workshops at Amana to see if that would have impacted how glass was manufactured. So I'm in the process of trying to get my dissertation published, so you'll be able to read all about this soon, hopefully. There's still a lot of work to be done in order to understand the glass manufacturing industry in late Bronze Age Egypt. We still don't know the full extent of firing regimes and temperatures at which different glasses were created. But the work done in this study has shown that the production of ingots was possible through the use of crushed shells as a lining for the ingots. The value of glass in late Bronze Age Egypt is also yet to be explored in full. Work conducted in this study has assisted in furthering our understanding of glass as a commodity in the ancient world. Although steps should still be taken to investigate the structure of workshops across Egyptian glass production sites, this study assisted in understanding how the variations in workshop layouts and designs might have impacted the quality of glass produced at different sites. So yeah, the avenues for future research presented here, they do offer opportunities for new steps to understand glassmaking technology in New Kingdom Egypt. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. That was really, really interesting. Another fantastic presentation. Please do pop any questions in the chat if you have any at the moment. Just as a quick update for you, because I didn't mention earlier, we have one more speaker today. Our final speaker, who should have been afterwards, has been in touch to say she's not able to make it today, unfortunately. But our next speaker will be Brandon Ethel, with a talk on analysis of Anglo-Saxon knife typologies and burial costumes at Mucking. So I'll hand over to you, Brandon, if you're ready.
Yeah, I'll just start the screen sharing thing. One sec.
Yeah, there you go. Brilliant.
Right. Oh shoot. I'm very sorry.
That's
I seem to
okay.
turn on subtitles rather than bother.
It looks good now, I think.
Yeah, I'm just trying to get the notes up for me because otherwise I'm going to be a bit lost. I'm so sorry. It didn't do this earlier. Right. Of that, can you see my notes as well, or?
No, I can't see any notes.
Fantastic. That's great.
Brilliant.
Right. Sorry about that.
That's okay.
So, my name is Brandon Ethel. I'm a trainee currently with pre-construct archaeology, but previous to that, I've just finished my undergrad with Christchurch University in Canterbury. This was my dissertation for that, which I've it's something I'd like to continue working on in the future as well. Actually, there was a lot of unanswered questions at the end of this, but a lot of nice little answers that we got as well. So this is mucking about with knives. It's knives part in the burial costumes of Anglo-Saxon Mucking, which is a town just to the north of the Thames. With it, I wanted to readdress some of the questions that can be asked of individual parts of burial costumes. For that, I chose the knife because it's probably the most sort of ubiquitous of burial objects. And it's something which found use in the home, workplace, and also in the sort of the warfare, warrior style burial costume. I must apologize for the what's it called? The slideshow, though. My original one has been lost alongside my uni OneDrive, so I've thrown this one together a little bit. I hope it holds up. So yeah, first off, this is the site of Mucking. Like I said, it's in South Essex, just alongside the Thames, so it was a pretty developed site. It had signs of Romano-British periods previous to the Anglo-Saxon, and there's two Romano-British cemeteries, and there's two Anglo-Saxon cemeteries. My study focused on Anglo-Saxon Cemetery 2 because this is all in a quarry pit, and if I zoom in a bit, the southern there we go. Near the center, there's Anglo-Saxon Cemetery 2, whereas Anglo-Saxon Cemetery 1 is just truncated by the edge of the excavation area. So I didn't want to include that because there wasn't enough information there. The knife typologies that were used at Mucking were not necessarily the best ones that could have been used. Anglo-Saxon knife topologies in general are still in the state of being shaped even today. Many sites are still relying on the first major typology which is recognized, which was Bonner's in 1958, which is based completely on abstract interpretations of sites in the Trier region of Germany, and are just not applicable to sites in the UK in the same way. Everton, Otway, MacDonald, and the final one along here is MacDonald and Blakelock, have attempted to develop proper analytical style typologies, but we still don't have any function-based form typologies at all, or any analysis of function-based knife form, which is something which I'd eventually like to work on a bit more. There are some there is some work on metallographic analysis of knives, but that's something which I wasn't able to do within my analysis. So this is going to be form-based and associated finds based. The typologies used at Mucking were originally Everson's, which you can see here on the left, which is based off of Bonner's 1958 typology. They also used Hark's 1989 length and width typology, though they didn't apply it properly and they decided only to use the length part of it, which kind of invalidates it. And they also used a bespoke Tang typology, which can sort of be made, well, the basis of which can be made out here in McDonald's typology. Though they added, or rather they changed D type so that rather than being adjacent to the top of the blade, the back, sorry, the thicker parts of these images are the back of the blade, whereas the thinner part is meant to indicate the cutting edge. There's another cutting edge which they found at Mucking, which is where the Tang is adjacent to the cutting edge. It's likely that this is through heavy wear and resharpening of the blade, because there's no point in having a knife that you're going to blunt your knuckles with as you cut things with. I reworked these typologies and the data set. I created a new Excel spreadsheet and data set for the site. And for that, I used Ottaway's form typology, because this is Ottaway's 1989 version, which is an earlier one he used, but it's the most accessible for the access to data I had, which was mostly images, scale images. It also has the bonus of being applicable to most kinds of knife. There's very few knives which aren't going to sit into this typology, which gave me the scope I felt I needed to assess this site without any bias. To the right, we can also see the Tang typology used at Mucking. This I decided to stay with because it breaks it down nicely. It's quite simple, and on the far right you can see the equivalent in McDonald's typology. So it's not in order, but it works quite well. Instead of Hark's length and width typology, I have kept just the raw data of length and width, because as they're quite linear data values, it was a lot easier to work with. Also, one of the reasons that Ottaway was chosen here is that a number, well, Everson especially, a number of the other typologies rely on the cutting edge, and if there's too much wear on the cutting edge, which there often was at Mucking, then it just couldn't be applied in the same way. This is the size analysis of types A, B, and C knife under Ottaway's typology. The top left is A, and we can see that these are among the largest of the knives at the site. They are slightly above average in length, but you can still see the wider they are, the longer they are, as is the case with the others. C is the most common, and also has some of the longest on the site. This has been found to be quite well associated with warrior style burials. And I use that term loosely. I understand that the concept of warriors at this time of period is much debated, but for want of a better word, I will use the term warrior burial costume. These are D, E, and the bottom right is the unknown knives, which couldn't be it couldn't find a typology for, even or a type for, rather, using Ottaway's typology. We can see from E that they're generally wider than the other types, and it's inferred this may be because they are more to do with tool work as opposed to an all-purpose knife, but this due to the extra heft that the width would allow them, but this is analyzed more later on. With the associative typologies, the first part I went for was the individuals in the graves themselves. So these tables here indicate the top left one indicates the age ranges I've had to use. These are the ones used at Mucking, and due to the way that it was carried out, I've had to stick with these. What's quite annoying is they've sort of lumped together some young / middle-aged adults and some middle / old adults. So those values within these tables may exist in the column to the left or the column to the right. So there's a bit of discrepancy there. That said, we can see some things very obviously here. There is, with the table to the right, in general, the older you are, the longer your knife will be. And in the middle age, which is column 5, this is middle adults. They have the greatest access to width, type, and form, as also shown by this table here. So we can see that type C is most commonly found with middle adults. And this may be due to its relationship with the warrior burial costume, or it may be to do with status, and this is a medium status knife. This is analysed a bit further later. Now, another difficulty we ran into at mucking is some of the smaller graves, which it was inferred would be for children, contained, well, they contained no bones because the soil didn't allow for it, but they did contain adult teeth, meaning that there may have been a community of very short-statured adults, which has meant that I've had to rely only on teeth analysis and growth plate analysis for these ages. So the unknown section is a lot larger than I would have liked it to be. Also, the red knives, that's type A, they are, as I said earlier, they are often of a larger length. The fact that they are found, that they're the only knife found with children, may indicate that this is a symbolic knife given to them. They're not given to young adults, but they are given to middle-aged adults and older adults, likely because it's deemed an adult blade, and this was given to the children more for the future they'd lost rather than as something they would have owned themselves. Type B isn't found above or below middle adult age, so may have been popular for heirlooming, but we haven't got enough information to really decide on a proper inference for that. As I said earlier, type D blade is likely more tool related, and its presence with the young adult to middle / older adult may reflect this, as this will be the more working period of time for these people. Sex was another problem that we ran into at this site. While almost every body had been sexed, they were sexed based on associated grave goods as opposed to any osteological analysis. So in the end, only 13, oh wait, no, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 14, sorry, bodies had been osteologically sexed. And of these, 1 was a female, which meant that the gender analysis that we'd hoped for couldn't be carried out. What was interesting, though, was that this female was buried with a spear and one of the largest type C knives, indicating a full-on warrior-style burial costume. And the fact that we found, as you can see here, 552/10 male was found with beads, as were 568/1998/9, which, whereas beads had often been considered a feminine item, we can see from this that they were not. So that's 2 burial costume sort of norms already out the window, which is very interesting. As you can see here, the males also have smaller knives each than that held by the female. So we cannot let gender norms affect our view of this site. Now down to the costumes themselves. So the warrior costume at mucking, almost all burials that contain a spear also contain a knife. Where they don't contain a knife, it may be because they never held a knife, or the individual never owned a knife, or the knife was heirloomed or lost, or, well, there are a number of reasons there, but heirlooming is the most inferred one. There's a major separation between the warrior costume and the beaded costume, which I'm going to call the wealth costume, where any costume that contained a sword, shield, or spear did not contain beads, glassware, or any status object, except in one case where two cases where they contained a decorated bucket. It's possible that bucket's relationship to burial costume indicates a third burial costume, but there's just not enough data at this site, which was quite upsetting, as it was chosen for the large data set it had, but it kept getting nibbled away at. Half the graves containing 2 war implements and a knife. Now, these war implements could be a shield, a sword, or a spear. Half of these also contained a small buckle next to the knife, and the knife was often around the waist. Now, this has been inferred to mean that the knife was attached to the belt using this buckle, leaving the hand symbolically free to hold the weapons. This attaching to the belt shows that the knife is an important part of the burial costume, but lower level than the weapons themselves. And this may be to do with the homely item aspect of the knives, playing into the burial costume, reflecting that separation of the warrior costume between home and away. But it's more likely that it's because these are seen as a backup sort of tool, weapon, item. One thing that was solid was that the warrior costumes almost all had a type C knife. These weren't the longest, which was type A, but this was one strong note. Then we go on to the beaded costume. These were among the best furnished in the cemetery. There was a number of associated grave goods which weren't analysed for this, but were put into the notes column of the data table I created. And these had an overwhelming amount of wealth. They had glassware and Roman coins and decorated vessels of all kinds. They did not contain any weapons in any of them, but the majority of the sex, well, all of the sex ones were men, and it's likely that the majority of those that had beads were of a masculine nature, in which case beads are seen here to reflect status. Something that is interesting with its relation to knives is that in general, the higher the number of beads in the grave, the larger the knife was and in better condition. So those burials with 2 beads were found with very short knives, but there was one burial with 36 beads and it had one of the longest knives in the cemetery. They tended to choose knives of various different types, but tended to not go for type C knives, which may indicate a stronger link to this knife and the warrior burial costume. This was, I'm afraid, all that could really be found out from the passioning that we went through. As I said, it left more questions to ask than it left answered. But we were quite happy with the outcome and the solidity of the outcomes we had. Different aspects of the burial costume and its relationship with its context would like to be analysed in the future. If more time had been possible, we would have gone into the placement of the grave in the cemeteries, the time period of the graves, as I mentioned earlier, with the coming of Christianity and how those were arrayed, and use-wear analysis at a microscopic level of the knife itself would be incredibly useful to discern some kind of function and of the knife, and that would increase incredibly our understanding of its relationship with the burial costume. and then also construction, and the graves that were there without knives would have brought a lot more of information in. But yeah, we were quite happy with what we came up with. And here's some further reading. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thank you, Brandon. It's really interesting research again. No, it's fantastic. I think we've had some really good topics today. It's been a wide range, it's kept things really interesting. So we do have a bit more time now for the Q&A, what with our last speaker not being able to make it. So if you have any questions and you'd like to ask it properly, feel free to raise your hand. But we could start with some from the chat. So our first question was for Martina from Anna Welch. And she's asked, were there very valued places that were a surprise, or any places that you expected to turn up that didn't?
There were some places I was surprised to find, and the reasons, so people said they are magic places, and there were places that were connected to traditions I didn't know. For example, the Eagle Stone in the Peak District National Park. That's where sons-in-law, potential sons-in-law, have to climb up to prove that they are worthy to marry the daughters of the villagers. So it's quite nice traditions, I found. And I also compared the outcome of my Twitter analysis and the survey. The Twitter analysis was for people, so visitors and the wider sort of people talking about the Peak District National Park. And the survey was specifically focused on people living and working in the Peak District, so it excluded outsiders. And there was a significant difference between places insiders and outsiders liked. So one, for example, was Bakewell is a really nice chocolate box village in the Peak District National Park, and locals actually really like it because it's something like something where you go on the weekend to have a nice cup of coffee and a Bakewell pudding and things like that. And it was less valued by outsiders, possibly lesser known or whatever. So there were some surprising things coming up. Yeah.
Brilliant. Nice. I think it's really interesting, actually. Just another question from Meg. She's asked that about the emoji evaluation, which I also found really interesting, quite novel, really. She said that about the sycamore gap being felled recently, and about how there's been a huge response on social media. And she's asking whether the model segment between this engagement before and after would be different, whether it would be classed as an outlier. I don't know if you want to unmute Meg and ask that question properly. I feel like I may have butchered it a bit.
I probably butchered the text myself. I just thought in terms of how you were looking at the Peak District, and I might have got that wrong then, Martina, but it looked like it was more like retrospective looking on Twitter. And I just wondered, in a case where it's a reaction to something that's happened like overnight, how would that present in your data patterns? And is there something that kind of looks at and filters that to make it more like evident of like a big change, or is there something that kind of makes it seem that it's like it was like this but now it has changed recently? I was thinking in terms of like maybe the emojis might be different, you know, there'll be a lot of like maybe heartbreak heart emojis or something like that, and whether like your model, how you would expect it to account for that, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, absolutely. So unfortunately there was not enough time to talk about my Twitter analysis, which is now called X, so weird thing. But so there were some really interesting things coming out, and what you could do, it's unfortunately not possible to do it anymore because the access to Twitter data has changed since the changes that came to it. So they are actually now behind a paywall. You can't do the research I've done without paying a lot of money, which is really annoying. But at that time, you could just scrape legally data from Twitter when you apply for a Twitter academic developer account. Then you had time to access to all the Twitter data going back to 2006 when it started. And that was an amazing opportunity because it was really easy. Once you automate the process, you can just go into Twitter, scrape the data, and then automatically analyze it and get your data out for different time periods. So what I did, what I wanted to know with my first analysis was comparing the years before the pandemic, during the pandemic, and afterwards. And you could really see in the emojis how emotions changed. So before the pandemic, we had sunshine, happy faces, and things like that. And during the pandemic, when we had stay local orders, restrictions, there were really high tensions between locals, between visitors. So there were a lot of angry, swearing faces. And then afterwards, it sort of all relaxed again, and we had happy faces. What is also interesting is when I ran my sentiment analysis on the data, we had something quite similar, comparable to the sad situation with the sycamore tree. There was something weird in my sentiment data when I ran it on the year 2020, when we had restrictions all over Britain due to the COVID pandemic. The sentiment on the textual analysis was much too positive. So the emojis were really angry and swearing faces. And then we had the textual analysis, which was very positive. And I thought I had to go into the data and have a look what's going on there. And what the textual analysis, as compared to the emojis, didn't pick up was sarcasm. So we had this Dominic Cummings situation where people were really angry because Dominic Cummings were driving to Barnard Castle to test his eyesight and all of this, and people were just saying, so, oh, I think I go to one of these really lovely places in the Peak District to test my eyesight, and it was sarcasm, which the analysis didn't pick up, but it was actually angry and not happy and positive. So it's really interesting what comes out of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Just a comment from Anna as well. She's just sharing that it'll be interesting to compare the results with Instagram favorite places as well, and that some quite unknown local places sort of become Instagram magnets, leading to a higher number of visitors just to take photos. Was it just Twitter you looked at the moment? Yeah,
so at that time when I did my analysis, the problem with social media data is privacy and access to the data, actually. So when I did my analysis, Twitter was the easiest way. You just applied for the Twitter academic developer account, and then you had access to all of the data, whatever you wanted, limited just by the ethical things that you were not allowed to present single tweets, because they were you can Google tweets back to the tweeter, to the user, so that was not allowed. But within these restrictions, you could do everything with the data. With Meta, Facebook, and metadata, the problem is at the time when I did my research, they only provided pre-prepared packages for academic researchers. So they restricted you in what you could scrape from social media and how you could analyze it. So I only used data because Twitter, because it gave me all the freedom, which is now not there anymore, unfortunately.
Thank you. We've got another question in the chat from Charlie, which we'll take, and then we'll move on to one for Sarah, I think, just in the interest of time. So Charlie's asked, in what ways do you think a larger data set could be used by planning bodies? It would be interesting to analyse the differences between a site such as Sycamore Gap and the Crooked House pub, both valued local monuments that have now been lost in their original form, but in different areas of the country and a rural or urban locale. Or she's difference in the textual and emoji messages, sorry.
I think it's as I say, going forward with the ethical implications with artificial intelligence tools, it all gets more difficult in terms of ethical approaches and implications in our approaches. So people are more and more worried about privacy. Researchers are more worried about privacy, and using data sets for models, for example, to create any form of models. There's always a bias that you introduce, so it's really difficult. However, I think it had a real potential to give local authorities a hint where are hotspots, where are people talking a lot about, visiting a lot, and where are problems, where are issues, which I sort of discovered with sentiment analysis, to see how people differently react to the Sycamore Gap or the Crooked House pub. That would be really interesting. But it gets more and more difficult to work with such data, with social media data, because we are now in a discussion about ethical implications, privacy, and that sort of restricts what we can do, actually.
Yeah, no, thank you. It's some really, really interesting research. Sarah, are you there at the moment? Hiya. We've got a question from Anna for you. She's interested in the evidence for glass recycling in ancient Egypt and sees that it's on your list for the future. What evidence will you be looking for that might show where and how glass was recycled?
So basically the whole idea with recycling glass in Egypt, it came from, I did a project about glass technology earlier in my master's, and that stemmed like the inspiration for my dissertation. But I was looking at recycling in that project, and basically green glass from late Bronze Age Egypt, it has a lower concentration of lead and antimony. It's just chemically different to the rest of the other glass colours. So I thought that maybe the lower concentration of these chemicals meant that the other colours were being remelted and combined to make green glass. And as well, with like symbolism and everything, green glass was considered less valuable than like blue glass and stuff like that, just because so like blue glass is really connected to like the sky and like sky gods and things like that in Egypt, whereas green glass wasn't, basically. So I was looking into that, and it basically came back down to we don't know enough about the manufacturing process of like yellow glass, blue glass, like all the other colours. So we need to figure that out first, but then hopefully we'll be able to figure out whether recycling was something they did at all, and if they did, how did they manage it? So yeah.
Thank you. Does anyone else have any questions for Sarah? And feel free to unmute, you don't have to type it out. Not at the moment, we can come back. Brandon, I've seen there's a question in the chat for you that you've answered via the chat, but I wondered if you'd like to unmute. We've got some time if you want to talk us through it.
Yeah, sure thing. Sorry about that.
It's okay.
So yeah, I mean, I shot that off just in case it had been missed. But yeah, this is exactly the thing that I'd like to focus a more sort of experimental archaeology sort of paper on in the future. The knife, or the use wear on the knives is quite hard to see. Within the paper I've done, it's most obvious with the tang position. So the knives with type D tangs, which is where it's adjacent to the blade, to the cutting edge, I mean, were inferred to be where the knife had been worn away through use and then resharpened, rather than cut off and resharpened. And this would arise from repeated exercises, rather than, because the quality of the metal, it meant that it would probably snap as opposed to wear away during a defensive sort of situation. This is likely just for the mucking area and the quality of metal they had access to, though. That said, while I was researching the data set, there was a number of knives which showed like heavy wear in specific areas of it, which may indicate chopping actions, slicing actions, or more sort of dexterous actions related to the tips of the blades, which is something I'm starting to put together at the moment. And I hope not to, have so many questions at the end of that. So yeah, that's what I'm thinking.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions at this point? We're a bit early on the schedule, but we have been missing a couple of speakers. If not, I'll be handing over to Jen, if she's there.
Yep, hello. I'm here. Just trying to. Here I am. So that was brilliant. That was a fantastic session, and it was really interesting to hear all of the research and the discussion and the questions. So I hope you've enjoyed it as much as we have, and thank you ever so much to the speakers for coming along and presenting your research and taking time to do that. We really do appreciate that, and we will be sharing these as the recordings, so hopefully you'll get more questions potentially in the future, or people will look up your research, and we will share that with everybody, and hopefully you've enjoyed it as well. So we really do appreciate your time. Just to let you know, we did have a couple of speakers that were unfortunately unable to attend today, so we will hopefully be able to share their presentations at a later date as part of the final recordings, if they're made available to us. I'd lastly like to thank co-chairs Ellen and Megan for doing a fantastic job